Hello and welcome. It's 10 a.m. on Monday, the 15th of December. You're tuned in to our mid-morning newscast here on Arirang TV. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Broome. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's ruling political coalition wins a landslide victory in Sunday's snap general election. The win gives Abe 4 more years to institute his Abenomic policies aimed at reviving Japan's economy. North Korea's grave human rights abuses will likely be placed on the UN Security Council's agenda this week, significantly ramping up international pressure on the regime. Plus, Sydney is on lockdown. Suspected Islamic terrorists are holding around a dozen hostages in an armed siege in a cafe in the city's business and banking centre. And we'll be connecting to our Eunice Kim on that possible hostage situation in Sydney very shortly. But let's start in Japan, and the country's ruling coalition won more than 2/3 of the total seats in the lower house in Sunday's snap general election. This gives Prime Minister Shinzo Abe the mandate he was desperately looking for to push ahead with his sweeping economic and security-related plans. Our Son Jong-in starts us off.
Japan's ruling coalition won a landslide victory in parliamentary elections seen as a referendum on Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's economic policy. Abe's Liberal Democratic Party, together with its junior partner Komeito, retained a 2/3 majority of 475 seats in the lower house of parliament, giving them the power to pass legislation without recourse to the upper house.
I'm relieved we've managed to continue our ruling coalition with the Komeito party. But at the same time, this is also a great responsibility.
It was a crushing defeat for the main opposition Democratic Party of Japan, falling well short of the 100 seats it had unofficially targeted. Many observers say the lack of a clear political alternative to the ruling party left many voters feeling underwhelmed and questioning the need of an election in the first place. And as if reflecting the people's indifference, voter turnout was 52%, the lowest figure since World War II, and well short of the previous low of 59% set in 2012. Abe is now widely expected to push ahead with expanding the role of the military and restarting Japan's nuclear power plants. The win also gives the Prime Minister a fresh 4-year mandate to institute his economic policy known as Abenomics, which aims at reviving Japan's economy through monetary easing and strong public spending. 손정인, Arirang News.
Now, North Korea's human rights record will likely be in the spotlight yet again this week as the United Nations prepares to consider a resolution on this issue. But expected vetoes by 2 of Pyongyang's allies, China and Russia, are a major concern, of course, as is an important anniversary just before the vote. Ji Myung-gil reports.
The UN Security Council is likely to put North Korea's human rights record on its agenda this week. This follows UN members' passage last month of a strongly worded resolution calling for a referral of North Korea to the International Criminal Court for human rights violations.
Draft Resolution L28 Rev 1 * is thereby adopted.
The draft resolution, which won the favor of 111 member states, will likely pass the UN General Assembly on December 18th. After that, the issue will be put on the Security Council agenda. If the Security Council adopts the resolution, Pyongyang could be referred to the ICC. But only the Security Council can refer cases to the ICC. That means the chances that Pyongyang will be referred are slim, as China and Russia, 2 of the 5 veto-holding permanent members, are expected to reject a referral. Earlier this month, 10 of the 15 council members signed a letter calling for the North Korean human rights issue to be placed on the Security Council agenda for debate. North Korea's allies, China and Russia, did not sign.
We don't think the UN Security Council is the right place to discuss human rights problems. Referring human rights issues to the ICC won't solve any problems.
One concern is that if the Security Council passes the resolution on December 18th, Pyongyang could respond with anger, as it did last month. North Korea's Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs said the campaign staged by the United States and its followers
in their attempts to eliminate the state and social system of the DPRK is compelling us not to refrain any further from conducting nuclear tests.
Another concern is that the day before the final vote on the resolution, December 17th, is the third anniversary of the death of former North Korean leader Kim Jong-il. Kim Young-git, Arirang News.
The US government has confirmed the identity of the American citizen who was paraded by North Korea over the weekend, denouncing US policies, and says it's prepared to help secure his safe passage out of the north. Speaking to South Korea's Yonhap news agency, State Department Deputy Spokesperson Marie Harf, you can see there, said the safety of its citizens is one of the government's most important priorities, but advised Americans to think carefully before traveling to the north. On Sunday, 29-year-old Texan Arturo Martinez criticized Washington for alleged human rights violations and illegal wars, and he named the Iraq War as an example. Martinez said he entered North Korea illegally in November by crossing the Yaru River between North Korea and China. Now, he said he was not being held captive in North Korea and is there of his own free will, adding that he plans to seek asylum in Venezuela afterwards. But there are reports that his legal status is uncertain and he may not be allowed to leave the country, as Pyongyang might want to use him for propaganda purposes. The South Korean government is seeking ways to improve the current frosty relations with North Korea as the year draws to a close now. Seoul plans to start talks on the resumption of a suspended tour program to Mount Kumgang in North Korea and reunions for families separated by the Korean War. Meanwhile, a group of South Korean firms continues to call for the lifting of the so-called May 24th sanctions on North Korea, which has suspended pretty much all inter-Korean economic projects, with the exception of only the joint Kaesong industrial complex. These sanctions were imposed on Pyongyang after a deadly torpedo attack on a South Korean warship back in 2010. South Korean government officials have acknowledged that the May 24 sanctions acted as one of the biggest obstacles to mending ties between the two Koreas. Now, we begin our international news with the developing story out of Sydney, Australia, where we are following a possible and increasingly likely hostage situation in the Australian city. Let's connect live to Eunice Kim at the News Centre now. So, Eunice, we've seen images splashed all over the international news this morning of people, presumably hostages, holding up a kind of black flag with white Arabic writing on it, and they're holding it against a window of what is a very popular chocolate-stroke coffee shop in downtown Sydney. It's obviously an extremely tense situation there as we speak, but what do we know so far?
Well, Mark, what we know is Prime Minister Tony Abbott has confirmed that this is an active hostage situation right now, ongoing for the past couple hours and still ongoing in that pedestrian mall called Martin Place, which is where the Lindt chocolate shop is located with the hostages inside. That is at the heart of Sydney's shopping and banking district. Now, 7 News in Australia is reporting that it believes there are 13 hostages trapped inside the chocolate shop, with 1, possibly 2 gunmen involved. Now, Korea's Yonhap news agency additionally reporting that a Korean resident, a Korean youth, could be among those hostages. And the black flag that you mentioned with white Arabic writing, it was held up against the window for a time by people inside. The Guardian is suggesting that it does not appear to be an Islamic State flag, but it does bear the Shahada, which is a neutral Islamic creed seen on things like the Saudi Arabian flag, but also embraced by jihadist groups. Authorities are taking full precautions, including rerouting air traffic from the area. The Sydney Opera House has also been evacuated as New South Wales police contain the area.
No, it's an extremely worrying situation. Of course, we have no idea of what the end game here is going to look like, so we'll continue to watch this story extremely closely, of course. And meanwhile, then, a step forward in the global coordination to counter climate change. Member countries of the UN, basically at a conference in Lima, Peru, at the 11th hour, reached an agreement on a framework to cut carbon emissions.
Right. It was 2 weeks of tough talks plus a 2-day extension as countries wrestled with how much they would shoulder when it comes to cutting greenhouse gas emissions. And it seems despite the challenging debates, representatives did come out of it generally satisfied.
It's a good document from the Peruvian leadership, which has done a good job, and I think this is a very good base for an agreement in Paris. A good job was accomplished.
India's environment minister also agreed with that sentiment, saying a true consensus was reached. Significant with this treaty that had nearly 200 signatories is that it shifts from only wealthy nations being required to cut emissions, as outlined in the 1997 Kyoto Protocol, to everyone doing their share. During the past 2 days, countries had been locked over how and how much the rich and poor would contribute, with emerging economies like China and India saying earlier drafts had placed too heavy a burden on them. The draft agreement would have individual countries submit their emission goals by the end of March in light of different national circumstances, ahead of the international climate treaty that is to be signed in Paris next year and come into effect in 2020.
Yeah, well, good news ahead of that huge summit in Paris next year, and hopefully they can reach some kind of solid agreement there. Now, to an agreement of another kind, the US Congress has passed a budget bill avoiding a government shutdown that had been warned about previously.
Right, at least for this year, we have sidestepped that threatened government shutdown, and the budget bill caps off a 2-year legislative session marred by bitter partisan disputes and few major gains for the country. The Senate approved the bill 56-40 on Saturday night local time and is expected to be signed into law by President Barack Obama before it expires at midnight on Wednesday. The 1,600-page bill includes an additional $5.4 billion to fight Ebola. It would also fund most government agencies through September of next year, though the country's Homeland Security Department is only covered through the end of February, which is just in time for the Republican control of both chambers of Congress to kick in.
Okay, thank you very much, Eunice, and we'll see you again with the latest on the situation in that confirmed now hostage situation in Sydney during our next newscast at noon Korea time.
See you then.
South Korea has been a major buyer of Western military hardware for a great many years, but its own defense industry is growing now at a startling pace. For a look at what has been driving the nation's success in recent years, our Kim Hyun-bin has this week's Industry Insight.
South Korea's defense exports have ballooned over the past 5 years or so. Until the early 2000s, the country's defense industry exports were mainly small arms and supplies, such as boots and helmets. The situation today is vastly different. In recent years, South Korea has been exporting heavy-duty military arms and vehicles, including fighter jets, submarines, and destroyers. This shift has dramatically boosted the nation's defense exports in dollar terms. In 2006, South Korea broke the $250 million mark for the first time. By 2011, this had jumped to $2.3 billion. And last year, the figure topped $3.4 billion. So what triggered the boom in sales?
Our prices compare favorably, and the nations that buy from South Korea are satisfied with what they get. All of our defense-related exports are used by the South Korean Army and are proven for battle. Also, as a lot of countries in the Southeast Asia are locked in territorial disputes with China, many now buy their defense-related equipment and supplies from South Korea instead of China.
The spillover effects from the defense deals to the economy have been sizable. Take, for example, the sale of 24 Fa-50 fighter jets to Iraq in 2013. Now, this deal, worth over $1.1 billion, will develop a chain of suppliers networks and after-sale deals that are estimated to total more than $4 billion. This project has also created roughly 36,000 jobs. While this sounds great, South Korea still has a long way to go to reach the level of the major players in the industry. The country's exports accounted for a mere 0.8% of the world's total defense exports. The United States, Russia, Britain, Germany, and France together have a grip on 3/4 of the total global arms market. And the dominant powers aren't sitting back as South Korea tries to sharpen its competitive edge.
The United States, France, Britain, and Germany are watching South Korea very closely as their competitors in the international arms market. Koreans should have pride in their defense industry and support government policies that make our country more competitive on the global stage.
South Korea has been successful so far, but to sustain and increase its share of the multi-billion-dollar arms market, the industry needs to diversify.
South Korea should open up to more markets in the third world. Most of them are in territorial conflicts and in need of naval equipment such as combat ships. In the future, we could make up to 3% of the total defense exports. But we need to invent new weaponry and upgrade our Korean-style weapons to meet global standards.
Competition is fiercer than ever, with Japan and China jumping into the defense market at full speed. For that reason, experts say the Korean government and the public need to stay committed and focused to maintain their growth in the international market. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Get connected to Korea and the world. Join us every weekday for the latest developments out of Korea, Asia, and beyond. On air, on your mobile, and online, we lead the way every day. Arirang News.
To try and resolve the crisis in Ukraine, the European Union also offers 15 billion. Now to the latest on the story that's been grabbing a lot of headlines here in Korea, and focus is growing on what exactly happened in the lead up to the so-called nut rage incident that caused the then Vice President of Korean Air to demand the plane be turned back to the terminal. Speaking to Korea-based TV network KBS, head steward Park Chang-jin, who was ordered to get off the plane by Jo Hyun-ah, that lady there, he said that he felt ashamed as he was made to kneel down in front of Jo while being bombarded with insults. Park added that Korean Air officials visited his home almost every day, demanding he falsely testify about the incident before the authorities. Jo has said she doesn't remember the events Park described, but a passenger who witnessed it has backed up Park's side of the story. Korea's Transport Ministry says Park will be brought in for additional questioning on this Monday. Now, oil prices around the world continue to fall, and that means the price of the pump in Korea is also falling, and that's good news for people in the transport-related industry, and also drivers can enjoy some cheaper gas prices. But unfortunately, there's another side to the coin. Other industries aren't faring as well. Shin Se-min tells us more.
Drivers have been happy lately, as the benchmark oil price has been on the decline, closing a little below $58 a barrel on Friday, a drop of 46% below its late June high for the year. Industries that rely on oil, like shipping and airlines, have been reaping the savings, as have businesses related to IT, like semiconductors and display panels. Low oil prices could also eventually boost the auto industry, inducing more drivers to buy larger vehicles.
In the U.S., the international oil price can be directly linked to the rise in consumer spending, so businesses that export IT products and vehicles to the U.S. can expect some benefits.
But not everyone is smiling. The refining industry is suffering, and the shipbuilding industry and domestic construction companies are seeing a drop in overseas orders.
The drop in oil prices causes an increase in real income, eventually revitalizing consumption. But at a time when consumer sentiment is stagnant, the increase may not be directly related to consumption.
The impact of the oil price drop on the Korean economy remains to be seen. Industry watchers say a strategy for making use of current oil prices is needed before oil prices bounce back up. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, Korean companies are seeking to tap into markets in Islamic countries, which together have a combined population of well over 1.5 billion people. But before they do have some hurdles to overcome, one of which is obtaining Halal certification. A Korean cosmetics brand recently got its hands on one, leading the way for local companies to try and follow suit. Now, Kim Min-ji reports.
Halal Cosmetic is the first Korean cosmetics brand to receive Halal certification from the Malaysian government. That clears about 150 products in its lineup for sale in the country. The company, which uses popular K-pop groups to advertise its products, hopes this will allow it to gain better access to the $2 trillion Islamic market. In fact, many Korean companies have been eyeing Islamic nations as their next business stop. But entering comes with strings attached as they need to obtain Halal certification to target the 1.6 billion Muslim population. Halal means permissible in Arabic and means that a product is approved for consumption or use under Islamic Sharia law. Simply put, a product cannot contain pork, alcohol, blood, or meat that wasn't butchered in God's name. So far, only a handful of Korean firms, including Pulmuone, have obtained necessary certification and enter countries like Malaysia and Indonesia. And Korean products overall remain relatively unknown to Muslim consumers. However, experts say Korean pop culture or Hallyu could help them gain a footing.
Products without halal certification are being exported to Islamic nations, but obviously Muslims don't buy them. But when products have the certification, they become a preferred choice, and because of the growing popularity of Hallyu there, that will make Korean products more appealing.
To take full advantage of this blue ocean market, the experts stress the company should also do more to offer halal-related goods and services in Korea to better cater to the growing local Muslim population and those who are visiting. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, there's been a significant increase in the number of people in Korea with high cholesterol. Up until now, the only way to treat the problem was to take statins or take some other measures to try and lower the level of the so-called bad cholesterol. But now local researchers say they've come up with another way to hopefully deal with the problem. Hwang Jie has more.
This patient is visiting the hospital due to her high cholesterol level. She went through sudden weight gain after menopause, and her blood cholesterol is at the dangerous level of 240 milligrams per deciliter.
I've gained a lot of weight over the last 3 years, and my cholesterol level rose fast as well.
A high cholesterol level increases the risk of heart disease and stroke, but not all cholesterol is harmful. There is good cholesterol called high-density lipoprotein, which the body needs an ample supply of, and bad cholesterol called low-density lipoprotein, which should be kept to a minimum. Up until now, the only way to treat high cholesterol was to lower the level of the bad LDL cholesterol, but the treatment has possible side effects, such as muscle pain. But local researchers have found a new way to control the body's blood cholesterol level by boosting the amount of good HDL cholesterol with the use of a liver X receptor. The team of doctors from Asan Medical Center found that mice injected with the receptor protein saw HDL cholesterol levels increase by 36% more than control mice.
The increased level of HDL cholesterol helps eliminate the body's overall cholesterol via the liver in the form of bile acids.
The team anticipates the new findings will lead to better treatment of arteriosclerosis while reducing the risk of side effects. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Well, it's going to be a snowy day today. It began to snow about an hour ago here in Seoul, then will gradually expand to other parts of the nation. Gangwon provinces will receive up to 20 centimeters of heavy snowfall, while Seoul and the surrounding areas will is somewhere between 1 and 5, and they will snow all day long, possibly into overnight. But due to relatively milder temperatures, it could be a mix of rain and snow, as the afternoon temperature here in Seoul will hike up to 3 this afternoon, while Daegu and Gwangju should peak at 6 and 8 respectively. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It seems like Jeju Island will be getting up to 12, while Daejeon and Dokdo sees highs of 6 and 5. Now this band of rain and snow will bring severe cold snap to the entire nation starting tomorrow, and will hit the peak on Wednesday and Thursday, with the lows plummeting to -12 here in the capital. So brace yourself for the coldest days of the season to come. That's all for now. Back to you, Mark, in the studio.
Thank you very much, Jiyeon, for the weather there. And that's all we have for now. Plenty more of today's stories are online, and we'll be back at noon Korea time with our next newscast. Until then, goodbye.